Hello, and welcome to the teacher seminar on question number 4 of our Unit 10 study guide, the progressive goal of regulating corporations. All right, we're going to be reading a few pages and answering the following questions in our study guide. What two issues did the Minnesota legislature address through a series of laws they passed? What were two benefits from these laws that Minnesota workers got? What is the argument against government regulating businesses? Explain in detail what happened to convince Minnesotans that the state's forests needed to be protected, and how did Minnesota decide to protect its forests? All right, so let's get into the book here. So the progressive goal of regulating corporations. Government was not the only institution that progressives wanted to reform. Big business was another major target. Reformers demanded that the government step in to protect workers and consumers from corporations they believed had become too powerful. Ida Tarbell was a reformer and a journalist who published a book about the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. In it, she claimed that Standard Oil had too much power and was an illegal monopoly. Tarbell's work had an impact. In a court case that went to the United States Supreme Court, Standard Oil was found to be a monopoly in order to break into a smaller companies. So monopoly is when a group or one company controls the product in one area. And when they do that, when you have all control over a product in an area, you can really control how much you charge for it. And so if people need it, they have to pay you that price. So you can raise the price and really kind of exploit people. All right. So let's keep moving here. So in this next paragraph, we're going to answer those first two questions in your study guide. All right. Now, reformers in Minnesota also had concerns about corporate power. They worked for change, much as Ida Tarbell had. In the early 1900s, the Minnesota legislature passed a series of laws meant to reduce corporate power. These laws addressed issues such as poor working conditions in factories and overly high shipping rates charged by railroad companies. So these are the two concerns. This is the answers to that first question in number 4 there. All right. They addressed issues of poor working conditions in factories and overly high shipping rates charged by railroad companies. Now we're going to answer the second question. The new laws established a minimum wage for employees, right? A minimum wage for employees that they had to pay workers. And the law also created a system for workers who were injured on the job to be compensated or paid while they recovered. Right? A system for workers who were injured on the job to be compensated or paid while they recovered. All right, so those in this paragraph here is where you're going to find the answers to questions 1 and 2 there. All right, railroad monopolies. One of the first big fights over corporate power began in 1901 when Minnesota's railroad industrialist James J. Hill tried to merge his Great Northern Railway with 2 other major railroads. He planned to create a single company that would control most of the railroad traffic in northwestern part of the country. Many Minnesotans, including Governor Samuel Von Sant, objected to Hill's plan. They thought one company could not monopolize or control such a large part of the nation's transportation system. President Theodore Roosevelt agreed. He ordered the Justice Department, a part of the executive branch, to sue Hill's company in federal court. In 1904, the U.S. Supreme Court decided against Hill. The court stated that it would not be in the nation's best interest for the 3 large companies to merge into one. President Roosevelt, Governor Von Sant, and many others cheered this decision. All right. So next we're going to read about logging practices, and this is going to be able to answer the 4th and the 5th question of your study guide. We're going to skip the 3rd one. We'll be answering that when we read the next section here. Logging practices. By the late 1800s, pine forests of northern Minnesota were disappearing. Lumber companies were cutting down the white pine as fast as they could, leaving behind cut-over land. Scarred landscapes littered with leftover branches, limbs, and stumps. Some Minnesotans argued that the lumber companies needed to be limited in order to protect the few forests that remained. But these reformers had a hard time getting anyone to listen. Then disaster struck, not just once, but repeatedly. In 1894, a huge fire fueled by dead brush, destroyed the town of Hinckley and burned 350,000 acres of surrounding forests and farmland. 413 people died. Over the next 25 years, a series of similar fires devastated several northwards communities. In 1908, flames destroyed the mining town of Chisholm. In 1910, Baudette and Spooner near the Canadian border went up in flames. The worst of the big forest fires struck in 1918 when a firestorm consumed Moose Lake, Cloquet, and 38 other towns, killing 559 people. Each of these fires helped to convince Minnesotans that the state's forests needed to be protected and conserved. All right, so that question there, what happened that convinced people that we needed to protect our forests? Well, it was a series of forest fires between 1894 and 1918, a series of forest fires that killed over 900 people and destroyed dozens of towns. And as well as burnt down hundreds of thousands of lands of forests or acres of forests, convinced people that we needed to change something and protect those forests. Many believed some forests even need to be off limits to the lumbering companies. Lawmakers responded by enacting a series of laws designated to prevent forest fires. They created the Office of the Fire Commission and the Minnesota State Forest Service to protect and manage Minnesota's timber resources. So that's how you're going to answer that last question there. All right, one last section to read here to answer that third question, and that is, what happens when the government regulates the economy? So we're going to read this first section here, and then I'm going to give you an overview of that second section. Then, all right, so this is going to answer the question about what is the argument against government regulation. Then, during the progressive movement, some people argued that the government should not regulate or make laws for businesses. Opponents of government regulation valued the ability of businesses and consumers to make their own decisions without the government telling them what to do. They felt if a business did something that consumers didn't like, then consumers would stop supporting that business and it would fail. The fear of losing customers would motivate business owners to do things well. So there's your answer, okay? They believed that businesses would act the way they're supposed to, because if they didn't, their customers would leave and then the business would fail. The problem with that is that if you have monopoly, if you're the only business that offers a particular product in an area, then if people need your product, you can basically do whatever you want and people still have to buy it from you. So that's the problem, okay? Now, progressive reformers, on the other hand, argued that sometimes the government needed to step in to promote the public well-being, the common good. This is exactly what the progressives pushed for when they claimed that James J. Hill's company was gaining too much power and becoming a monopoly. The government agreed with reformers and took action against James J. Hill, and it regulated the ability to acquire more companies and more power. So the federal government will step in when they believe that a law should be put in place that's good for everyone. So, for instance, the example it gives in the next column here are the nutritional labels on food. So the government believes that knowing what you're eating is something that is good for everyone. So they enacted a law back in 1990, before you guys were born, saying that nutritional information needed to be put on labels of food that can be bought in the store. All right. So because they believe that it is good for everybody, it is a law that the government stepped in and put into place. Okay. All right. So that should help you answer those questions within question number 4 in your study guide.